So I think this is a fundamental myth, is that we need to have a product in market in order to understand what the price should be. This is, I think, a fundamental misunderstanding, and it highly delays when folks think about their pricing, when actually pricing should be at the very beginning of a development process. Hey, we're building this thing. We understand what the value proposition is. And the CPG companies have known this for years before they invest in R&D or manufacturing or...
Welcome to another episode of From Startup to Wunderbrand with Nicholas Kuhner.
I'd like to welcome you all to the Volcano Worshippers Hour. And our first guest for this exciting podcast is Dan Balcauski. Dan, can you tell me your favorite volcano?
I think Mount St. Helens, because it had a very big impact on my childhood understanding of volcanoes.
I'm sorry, but Etna was the right answer. Thank you very much.
No. I actually hiked Mount Etna the day before it erupted. Yeah, we were quite worried about getting caught in the eruption, and we asked the guide. We were like, "Is it going to erupt today?" He goes, "No. Tomorrow."
So what kind of prayers and dances did you do to make the eruptions happen? Did you throw in a virgin down the crater?
Not a virgin. I threw in my girlfriend, though. So.
All right. I was going to think of deleting this, but now I'm definitely keeping it in. So, okay.
We'll put it on the blooper reel.
Yeah. So this isn't the Volcano Worshippers Hour for those of you who thought you were on the wrong program. We've got Dan Balcauski, and he is the founder and chief pricing officer of Product Tranquility. Dan works with B2B SaaS companies to define pricing and packaging strategies. For those of you falling asleep right now, don't worry, it does get more interesting because pricing is an extremely important part of branding, actually. And Dan's going to talk to us a little bit about how pricing impacts on the perception of your brand. He's taught at Kellogg, MBAs, been to Hong Kong, traveled around the world, exploring 21 countries, and has done a whole bunch of volunteering. So an interesting chap, because if you do pricing, you have to do other stuff as well. So Dan, welcome.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me, Nicholas.
All right. Now, maybe a slightly different question to what you've normally got on pricing, but is there an art to pricing, or is it all scientific and is it all sort of data-driven?
It's a wonderful question. It is art and science. So there is fundamentals of economic theory that you may vaguely remember from if you took an Econ 101 course, your view of what pricing in the real world looks like. But it's also art. Why is it also art? Because we are connecting the world of price, which is concrete numbers, with value. And value is not something that exists out there in the world like the force of gravity or the speed of light. Value exists like beauty in the eye of the beholder. So therefore, anytime we're dealing with humans and their psychological perception, there's also has to be art. I would like to maybe correct the record, because there is probably a predominant theory out there that it is mostly black box magic voodoo, that nobody knows anything, so we're just going to do whatever the highest paid person's opinion in the room is. I'd like to push back on that a little bit, because I think that highly overstates the case, that there are a long tradition of both practitioners, academics, etc., who have put pretty robust methods around a process that you could use to do this effectively.
Yeah, and I suppose it's when one's starting a business, pricing, I mean, you do think about pricing, but you're thinking about creating the logo, you're thinking about setting up the business, finding customers, etc. Pricing sometimes is one of the most complicated things to do, because as you start working through your business plan, you realize, oh, actually, the pricing I thought I could achieve out of this product of mine actually isn't going to make me any money. Am I going to do freemium? Am I going to do 14 or a 14-day free trial. There's so many different options. Am I going to let them pay for a whole year in advance, or monthly, or quarterly? I mean, these are quite tough business decisions. But before we get into that, I want to ask, let's do a little case study, especially since it's going to tie into two interesting topics. One is AI and one is going to be startups. Now, if we look at ChatGPT, when it and I want to see if you can help us understand how they've figured out their pricing, because it was free in the beginning, and then when they started to charge, probably a lot of people thought, nobody's gonna use it because they have to pay for this now. But if we think about the value that ChatGPT is giving people, is the pro version of $20 a month enough? Why didn't they say, well, we actually want fewer people using this versus opening it up to millions and millions of people and just charging a small amount of money? What could be their business strategy, if it was you, to make it so cheap?
So when you talk about a company like OpenAI, they have several different things going on and an evolution of their pricing going on. So the original, when they very first launched ChatGPT as this research preview, and I was actually just going back because I think we're almost at the 3-year anniversary of Sam Altman's tweet of that's how they announced it, come chat with this thing. And then it blew up like wildfire. It was free. And then they layered a $20 price point on it. But if you look at their user adoption, most users are still not paying anything. If you talk to the normies, that I'm not one of them, I'm perpetually online, immersed in the Twitter sphere and the AI bubbles, talking about the latest and greatest features and the battles between these foundation providers. Most people are just chatting with a free model, and they don't even understand why I would pay for this thing. You think about your parents, for example. What is a reasoning model? Why would I ever need that? But they realized that there was a set of users who wanted access to the latest and greatest capabilities and features. And so those people were willing to pay. And if you remember the early days of ChatGPT, I remember a tweet they had "Sir, our GPUs are on fire." They had to limit usage because of the demand. And so if you paid them, hey, you get to continue using it while we limit all the other free people. And so that was originally part of the value proposition. Now, when we think about value, I do get very concrete. The problem with a product like ChatGPT is it is very much like infrastructure. So if I'm going to charge you we'll contrast it, for example, with maybe a relatable piece of B2B software like a CRM, and I charge you per seat. That maps to, we're trying to help you increase revenue. That's the value proposition of a CRM. We make your salespeople more effective, more efficient. They follow up better, all these things to help them do their job better. And those people have quotas that they carry. And so it makes sense to align that with seats. However, if you look at a platform like ChatGPT, you could do so much with it. It tends to look much more like infrastructure. What do we mean by that? Something like AWS, where I'm buying storage and compute. It's what are you going to do with the compute? Well, I can do anything. So we kind of have that same problem with a platform like ChatGPT, where the value story gets very intermixed. And so then it looks a little bit more like what we think of as cost plus type pricing. Now, why do they leave a free version there? That is a business strategy in and of itself. I don't have any inside knowledge. I've not worked directly with OpenAI on this. My sense is there's been this long-standing narrative in that world of, we have run out of data. We have scraped all the world's internet information. Anthropic just paid a multi-billion-dollar settlement because they scraped a bunch of books off of public pirated repositories of books that they weren't supposed to, and had to pay a multi-billion-dollar settlement for doing that. OpenAI may be in a similar type lawsuit. I'm not clear on exactly all the status of those types of cases, but we have no more data left, and we know that these systems get better as we train it on more and more data. And so what better than millions of people chatting back and forth with our models to generate us more data? And so I often say that, one way we could characterize this free plus paid is a freemium model. Usually freemium is a bad approach. And usually one of the terrible answers that people give of why do freemium is, but the data will get the data. And usually that's a terrible answer. And you should never believe that if anyone brings it up in a meeting as to why you should do a freemium model. However, I think this might be one case where we have literally sucked the rest of the data out of the world. And if we can get humans generating a bunch of data out of our systems, that will be very valuable to us. Adopted this winner take all consumer mind share. It's very different if you look at the B2B space. So they have now evolved beyond a $20 price point. They now have a $200 price point for ChatGPT, where you can get access to, I think, ChatGPT 5 Pro and models and tools that they're continually releasing. Anything I say here will be out of date in 2 days, so no need to go down the list. But what they did realize is, hey, there are folks who want even more power out of this, and they are willing to pay that. Because I believe when they released that $200 price point, a lot of people said, who the heck is $20? Who's going to pay $200? And people paid it. Not only that, but you quickly saw Google with Gemini, Anthropic with Claude follow in their footsteps. Claude now has a max plan at $100 or $200 a month. Google also has an ultra plan in that similar category, where you have these extreme power users who are willing, able, and find value in those higher capable models, usually because you're using some sort of coding on top of it and you need a lot of capabilities and consumption there. So I said a lot there. I don't know if there's any place you want to dig in specifically.
Yeah, I think it's good giving a bit of an overview like that, and I suppose what I want to look at here is for a new product like this, there's the free version, there's the light version, there's the power user, and then there's also enterprise. And the costing for enterprise obviously must be quite complicated as well, because if we look at ChatGPT, I think companies like Canva, integrates ChatGPT now into their system. That's going to cannibalize from people who might have used ChatGPT, the paid version of ChatGPT by themselves. So what I'm seeing quite often now is BC, so before ChatGPT, getting any access to AI was magical. Now every single damn thing every SaaS product that you open has its own AI LLM or its own ChatGPT plugin. So I use Descript, I use a couple other things, and I'm like, why am I still paying for ChatGPT when I'm actually paying a little bit of ChatGPT in all of these other products that I'm using? So that's quite annoying. Anyway, that's just me complaining about that. Yeah, so that was just to touch on a little bit of AI and pricing along that. And something I wanted to chat about, which maybe you might have a bit of experience on, is a term called CLV. I'll pronounce that nicely. So customer lifetime value. I've spoken to a lot of customers or a lot of my clients, and they have no idea what their CLV is. Does that happen to you?
Yeah, so customer lifetime value, sometimes also CLTV, I've seen it, but it's the exact same concept. So this is one thing you'll often hear in the startup sphere, often given as advice, is understanding your CLTV, or sometimes it's also called LTV to CAC ratio. CAC is your customer acquisition cost. There's a sort of empirical rule that you want at least a 3-to-1, 4-to-1's better, 5-to-1's even greater. If you could get that up to 100-to-1, it'd be fantastic. But basically it tells you, like a rule of thumb, tell you how much you should reasonably spend when you add in the fully laden cost of sales, marketing, money you pay to Google or Facebook for paid ads or TV placement or whatever, the fully laden cost of acquiring a customer versus how much value that company is or customer is or account is going to generate for you over time. It is often unknown. And the big, I think, problem with that advice tends to be that in order to give a reputable number, you need to understand it would be better with a whiteboard, but you need to understand what the lifetime is of your customer. So if I'm a startup and I've been around for 12 months, I can sort of look at what my monthly retention has been of my cohorts for those first 12 months. And it might give me customers will be around for 18 months, but my company's only been in business for 12. So there is no way I could, with a straight face, go to investors say, well, my customer lifetime is 18 months. They're like, well, you've only been in business for 12, so how could you say 18? Well, this formula told me. The other additional problem is that those customer lifetimes also tend to change based upon the cohort that they're in. So your year one set of customers in business, it's like, hey, Nicholas, you're my buddy. I've launched a SaaS product. You want to pay me $10 a month? I'll give you a friends and family deal to like be an early adopter. That's going to look very different from customer number 753 who only found me because they saw some sort of Facebook ad, right? Maybe Nicholas, because you're my friend, feels a bit of guilt every time his mouse hovers over that cancel my subscription button. Customer 753 has no such compunction. So the parallels I could draw from that don't really map. And so I think that is common. I don't think it's necessarily I think it's a problem with people who dispense that advice, not understanding that unless you're kind of at a series B plus, either the venture sort of scale world or, probably have been a company that's been around for at least 5 years, those numbers are going to be highly fungible. And there's plenty of CFOs, and I've been part of these CFO discussions before, where that model of calculating that number, there's a lot of assumptions that are built in that can really change that number. And so it can get quite, there's ways to be more aggressive and conservative depending on how you're going to use that number. I'm assuming there's a pricing question buried in there, but that was...
Yeah. So you're working in SaaS, and as I mentioned slightly earlier, everything that you can shake a stick at now has an AI function in it. And this means that all of these products need to obviously adjust their pricing to take into consideration this marvelous new value it's adding. Plus, a lot of the products that you're probably working on now are brand new. Like you said, they don't have more than 12 months, 6 months, track record, or it's a totally new industry. So how do you do pricing for a new industry? Is this where a chief pricing officer comes in? So tell me what you do imagine a new company that is using all this fandangled AI stuff comes in and says they've got this new SaaS product, it's brand new, we don't know how to price it, it gives tremendous value, but we've only got 6 months or 3 months until somebody new comes in, and then 500 other competitors are going to be in the space, and we just don't know how to price ourselves. Has that been a discussion at all?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely been a discussion. I think a few things going on, right? So I think first of all, there'll be a lot of interesting dynamics at play over the course of the next several years. We already see this with companies that are reporting, they have those charts that show the number of years or number of months to 10 million in ARR or 100 million ARR. And you see some of these new companies shattering these records. I mean, OpenAI among them, but there's plenty of these other coding tools that are AI backed, or AI native, maybe is a better term, that are showing sort of this track record. And I think the big question is, going back to our customer lifetime, is it easy come, easy go? You get a bunch of people who are really excited to pay. There's a bunch of tools that, they could pick. Hey, I'm going to play around with this, but then there's not really any stickiness, any loyalty to it, right? And I think we see this even at the foundational model providers where, it's depending upon who is the latest model release, whether it's Anthropic, Google with Gemini, or with OpenAI. Oh, cool, I'm going to jump over to Gemini now. Oh, Anthropic released a new version of Sonnet. I'm going to jump over there. And so I think we're going to see that a lot. And so what is that revenue sticky? Now, I think the number one assumption in your question is, do we base pricing on user sort of adoption or like looking backwards in time? So I think this is a fundamental myth, is that we need to have a product in market in order to understand what the price should be. This is, I think, a fundamental misunderstanding, and it highly delays when folks think about their pricing, when actually pricing should be at the very beginning of a development process. Hey, we're building this thing. We understand what the value proposition is. And the CPG companies have known this for years before they invest in R&D or manufacturing or distribution. We have a concept. We can go out and talk to customers about, is this interesting? Is this something you would buy? What is the value of it to you? What would you be willing to pay for it? And there are many better and worse ways to ask those set of questions, but just at a high level. And then I think one thing as it pertains to the AI problem that the AI area specifically is, what we're really seeing out there is, your price is determined always by a set number of factors. So what's the customer value? What's the customer perception of that value? What's the customer willingness to pay? What are your competitors, your costs, and what are your competitors doing? And so the thing that's happening right now with these AI pieces is that the costs are fairly concrete. And when I talk about costs in a pricing context, it's not usually the fixed cost of development, because those are usually not what is material to a pricing decision, but rather the variable cost to serve. And so if I'm one of these SaaS companies that is paying OpenAI or Anthropic, a foundation model provider, for this backend, this is a significant amount of cost compared to what I'm used to providing, because storage, network, compute, almost marginally effectively zero, right? The software companies have benefited from those type of economics for a long time. So that cost component becomes very fixed. What's the other component, though, I mentioned of the pricing consideration, is the customer value. And I think this is another assumption that's buried in your question, is that I'm building these fantastic capabilities, so therefore the customers must value them. And I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of rush to companies to cover their costs when the value part of that equation is very uncertain. Customers are, first of all, being inundated with AI messaging. If you had an AI-enabled product in 2015, maybe that was unique. I think customers in 2025, when they see AI, they're like, yes, because it's everywhere. And so they don't really know what to do with it, what to make of it, or if it can actually solve their problem. So I think we're at an interesting transition point right now where the value still needs to be proven. And I was attending a talk a couple of weeks ago. There's another pricing expert who I really respect, a guy named Ethan. He's a pricing expert for Insight Partners. And he had this really great phrase, which I think is apropos for this, which is you have to earn the right to monetize. Because I think we saw this first wave of companies post ChatGPT that went out and said, hey, we're tacking on this AI capability. We know it's going to cost us money, so we're going to charge you for it. I think the perfect case study of this was Microsoft, what they did with Office 365. Office 365, I don't know what the exact pricing is today, but say, that includes, Word and PowerPoint and Excel, $10 per seat. They said, well, we're adding this AI Copilot for Office 365. So instead of you going in and writing your Word document, you could use the Copilot to write your document. So that's so valuable. That's such an upgrade from base Word. That's not worth just another $2 per seat. We're going to charge that at an extra $25 a seat. So the base, Office was 10 and then plus 25. The problem is everyone used Copilot for Office 365. It's like, this thing sucks. It doesn't do anything I want it to do. And so they got ahead of themselves. I think it was a smart strategic move, and I have all the respect in the world for Satya. I think he's done an amazing thing with that company from the previous regime and the turnaround story there. I think it is an example, though, that everyone can relate to, where they see, hey, just because you have this newfangled capability and you think at some point it's going to live up to this promise, it doesn't today. And so you have to prove that in the market that it is proving value, and that then you could price appropriately to that. And so I think we're in this crawl, walk, run space. And it's, I think, a little unique for folks because we haven't been in one of these phase transitions for a while. Maybe the mainframe to PC era, maybe the internet era. A lot of these things rhyme. They're not, the analogies don't always hold. But I think that's where we're at with this needing to price. But you can go out and talk to your customers before you launch to understand pricing, and happy to talk about what those type of conversations look like.
Yeah, and so this is obviously a very complicated time for SaaS, as you mentioned. And Microsoft, luckily, not everyone canceled their Microsoft 365 after that. But I had a similar thing with Gemini because I use Google products. And they foisted Gemini on me, and it was so terrible. I was so annoyed, and I tried the free trial, then they wanted to charge me, and I was like, nope, that's not happening. This is useless. It's getting much better now, but it still can't do anything. It is still very useless. Not useless, but it still has a lot of bugs. So don't charge me for something that's got bugs and doesn't work yet, especially if I'm your guinea pig and you are using my data to make this better. So I get your point there. Just interesting, another analogy about where we are now. ChatGPT, Google, Anthropic, all of these guys, they are starting to use nuclear power stations to generate power because it is so power hungry. And at some stage, I think all of these AI providers are going to be like the railway industry 100 or so years ago. There was this huge expansion. People put tons and tons of money in it. And the first guys who got in made lots of money. But then you've got railways everywhere, and the price just is going to drop down so low you can hardly give it away. And at some stage, AI is probably going to have to be not privatized, nationalized, because nobody's going to be able to afford to pay to maintain these nuclear plants, so that we can all use ChatGPT to ask how far are we from the sun every week. That might be interesting. I mean, there's so much to chat about on pricing, and I think we should probably choose on our next chat one specific little case study to work through. But I think what this initial discussion of ours has highlighted is the complexity of pricing, and how pricing your product wrong could sink you before you even get to that next phase of your business. So when you are selling coffee and bread and bagels, it's a pretty easy pricing model, I think. But you've chosen a nice and complicated area in terms of SaaS, Dan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest folks go and have a look at your website there for CEOs who want to know, and startups who want to know about where your pricing's at. You've got a SaaS CEO pricing scorecard that people can do for free on your site. Yeah, so where can I send folks, Dan?
Yeah, so happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. And yeah, I have my website, producttranquility.com. And as you mentioned, it's a new feature. I just launched the SaaS CEO pricing scorecard. So a quick assessment with a few yes/no questions, looking at different aspects of your monetization, and then some prescriptions based upon your responses. So folks can pick that up for free at producttranquility.com.
And there's a couple of good articles there. One of the things I think we'll chat about next time is, and I wrote this down here in a bright color, economic value is the key to setting prices. And, I talk about brand value, so that ties in nicely with sort of my wheelhouse. So I can talk about that. But Dan, it's been great chatting. Thank you so much. I think this will hopefully just get people's minds around the concept that there is such thing as a chief pricing officer, and why they should reach out to somebody who actually knows what the hell is going on in this space.
I really do appreciate your comments. So why not go and watch this live on YouTube, or go to my website, kuhne.no. That's KUHNE.no for more information.